Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hello, welcome back to Unbound, off script. I almost forgot the name of the show. Hoi, I'm Beth Curry. I remembered that much. I write books. I read books. I talk about books, and I talk about other things and weird things and funny things and bad things and good things and all of those kinds of things. And today I want to do kind of a deep dive into the lies that we tell ourselves to stay sane, I guess. And no, I'm not talking about I'll start my diet on Monday or he's just a bad texter. I'm talking about engineering, specifically the engineering of, well, let's start with the placebo button. You know the one, right? You're in an elevator and you just saw a guy walking towards the doors and he's wearing a backpack and he looks like he wants to talk about crypto or something. And he's definitely going to ask you how your day is going if he makes it inside. So you do what any civilized human does, right? You frantically mash the closed door button. You hit it like you're playing a 1980s arcade game or something. You're sweating, the doors linger, they mock you, and finally they slide shut just as his hand reaches the sensor, right? And you breathe a sigh of relief and you think, I did that. I am the master of my vertical destiny. Except you're not. You're just, I guess, a pigeon in a Skinner box, right? And the button is just a plastic fidget toy for adults. Since the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the closed door button in most elevators has been effectively lobotomized. It exists just for emergency personnel and maintenance workers who have a physical key, right? But for you, it's literally just a placebo. It's there so that you have something to do with your hands while the elevator's internal timer, which is going to close the door in 5 seconds anyway, does its job. And what I think is beautiful about it, the elevator manufacturers know you know. There have been articles about this, exposés, viral TikToks of electrical engineers gleefully explaining that your finger jabbing means jack shit, right? And yet we keep pressing the button. We can't help ourselves. Probably because the alternative is just kind of standing there with your hands at your side, staring at a closing door like some kind of passive medieval peasant waiting for the drawbridge to lower or something. I don't know. We'd rather feel like we're doing something, even if that something is objectively, demonstrably useless, than admit we're just kind of standing there and waiting. Architects and engineers realized a long time ago that humans are fundamentally impatient and twitchy animals. If we have to wait for a door to close and we have no way to interact with it, we get elevator rage or something. We start pacing and we sigh loudly and we pull out our phones and refresh our email 4 times in 6 seconds, even though we just checked it in the lobby. But if you give us a little plastic circle to press, we feel powerful, right? We feel heard. And the door closes and your brain releases a tiny squirt of dopamine that says, good job, champ. You closed the door. You're basically an X-Man. But it's a lie, right? It's a beautiful mechanical lie, and it's everywhere. But once you learn the button doesn't work, you still press it because we're friggin' idiots. I don't know. Because maybe the building is old enough that they haven't updated the system yet, right? I don't know. I don't push it anymore. I desperately wish that it worked and that I could push it, especially when I'm in Las Vegas. I stay at the Bellagio when I go to Vegas, and that's coming up. And actually, by the time this airs, I may be there or have been there. But anyway, hordes of people in the elevators all the time. You're always sharing an elevator with people. And it's weird. It's just such a weird experience. I don't know why. But anyway, older buildings, maybe they haven't updated the system yet. Maybe the elevator is just this magical exception. Like I said, maybe you just need something to do with your hands because standing still in a small metal box with a stranger feels like a hostage situation. At least I think it does. At the Bellagio. Anyway, it gets better or worse depending on how much you value the truth. The crosswalk button. You're standing at the corner of a busy intersection and you press the button and you wait and you press it again because maybe the first time the pole didn't feel your intent. I don't know. Maybe you didn't press hard enough. Maybe the city's infrastructure is like a vending machine and you need to give it a little extra love to get what you paid for, right? And you wait for the little white walking man to appear. And when he does, you cross with the smug satisfaction of someone who just successfully negotiated with the city's traffic grid. If you're in New York City or London or Toronto or any major metropolitan area that's been updated since the mid-2000s, I have some bad news for you. That button is the equivalent of giving a toddler a toy steering wheel in the backseat of your car, right? You can turn it all you want, but your mom is still driving that Honda Odyssey, honey. In New York, for example, about 90% of those buttons do absolutely nothing. They're dead buttons. The traffic lights are controlled by complex computer algorithms and centralized grids that don't care if you, Susan from accounting, are running late for spin class. The lights are going to change when the computer says so, and that's it. And the really wild part is the city traffic engineers will tell you this. It's not a secret. It's public record, but the buttons stay because the cost of removing thousands of poles and rewiring the infrastructure is astronomical, so they just leave them there. Just these hollow monuments to a time when pedestrians had a voice, and now they're just outdoor elevator buttons or something. But here's what actually happens, okay? The traffic light system runs on a loop. So let's say it's a 90-second cycle. For 30 seconds, north-south traffic flows. For another 30, east-west flows. And for the final 30, pedestrians get the walk signal. Of course, this depends on where you are. It's not always like this. The loop doesn't care about you. It doesn't care if you're there or not. It's going to complete its cycle whether you press the button 0 times or 50 times. But during off-peak hours, like 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, some of these buttons do work because the system switches to actuated mode, meaning it only stops traffic if it detects a pedestrian. So now you're in this kind of fun game of Schrodinger's crosswalk button, where it works and doesn't work, depending on variables that you can't see and will probably never understand. So why is the button still there? Because removing them is expensive, and more importantly, because we, as humans, need them. Psychologists call it the illusion of control. Studies show that when people believe they have some influence over a situation, even if they don't, they are significantly more patient and less stressed. Isn't that weird? If you stand in a corner for 90 seconds with nothing to do, you're likely to engage in jaywalking, which is legal speak for trying to get hit by a bus. But if you give someone a button to press, they'll stand there like a loyal golden retriever, convinced that they are the ones who stopped the 18-wheeler. One study actually measured how long people were willing to wait at a crosswalk. When the button was present, people waited an average of 30% longer before jaywalking. The button didn't change the light, it changed the human. I don't know. It's not urban planning. It's like daycare for adults or something. If you think that the government is the only one gaslighting you, you haven't worked in a corporate office lately. So let's talk about the office thermostat. We've all been there. It's August. The office is, 64 degrees. So we're wearing a parka at our desk, a parka. And your fingers are so numb you can't type. Per my last email. So you walk over to the thermostat, you click it up to 72, and within minutes you feel a warm brace. You feel vindicated, right? You feel like you've hacked the system. You go back to your desk, slightly superior to your coworkers who just suffered in silence. Except you shouldn't, because there's a high probability that thermostat isn't connected to the HVAC system at all. In the industry, these are known as dummy thermostats, or if you want to get fancy, placebo thermostats. HVAC techs have been installing them for decades. Why? Because thermal comfort is 90% psychological. In any given office, half the people are too hot and half are too cold. It is physically impossible to please everyone. If the maintenance guy actually let people change the temp, the boiler would explode from the constant tug of war. You'd have Karen from HR cranking it to 68 at 9 a.m. and then Todd from sales blasting it to 76 by 10 a.m. And by noon, the building would be oscillating like a sauna that's having an identity crisis or something. So the solution is to install a decorative plastic box on the wall with a digital readout that changes when you turn the dial, but does absolutely nothing to the actual temperature. Because the real thermostat, the one that's connected to the actual system, is locked in a maintenance closet or behind a panel in the ceiling that requires a ladder and security clearance to access. The temp is set centrally, probably by someone in a different building who hasn't set foot in your office for like 5 years. And the scary part, it works. Like studies have shown that office workers report being more comfortable after adjusting a dummy thermostat, even though the air temp didn't change by a single degree. We are so desperate for a sense of agency that we will literally hallucinate warmth if a little LCD screen tells us it's 72 degrees. One facilities manager I read about said he installed a dummy thermostat in his office, and the number of temperature-related complaints dropped by 80%. 80. 80. He didn't change the airflow. He didn't adjust the vents. He just gave people a plastic box to fiddle with, and suddenly everyone was comfortable. Like, we are essentially Sims here, kids. We're just wandering around, clicking on objects and hoping our comfort meter goes up while some guy in the basement laughs his ass off at our sweaters. Even when people find out the thermostat is fake, they keep using it because the ritual of walking over to the wall and turning the dial and returning to your desk is soothing, I guess. It's a ceremony. It's the office equivalent of a rain dance. I don't know. If you think physical buttons are the only things lying to you, let's talk about your screen. Specifically, the loading bar. You've seen it. You're downloading a file or waiting for an app to optimize. The bar flies to 50% and then crawls to 75%. And then inevitably it sits at 99% for, 3.5 minutes while you contemplate the heat death of the universe. You think that the computer is struggling. You think, wow, this is a heavy file. My Mac is really sweating this one out. This must be some serious data crunching happening in there. But that's wrong. Most loading bars are complete works of fiction. They are pre-rendered progress indicators. In fact, if a loading bar actually reflected what was happening in the CPU, it would move in an erratic, terrifying way. Terrifying jumps. It would sit at 0 for 10 minutes and snap to 100% in a millisecond. But humans hate that, right? We don't like instant, usually. We like progress. There is a concept in psychology called the labor illusion. We value things more when we think they took effort to create. Like if something happens too quickly, we assume it's cheap or lazy or incomplete or rushed, whatever. We want to see the sweat, right? So there was a famous study involving travel booking sites. One site showed you the results instantly, and the other one showed a little animation of searching through airlines with a progress bar that took 10 seconds. And users rated the slower site as being more thorough and accurate, even though the results were identical. In fact, in some cases, the instant site was actually searching more databases, but it didn't matter. Users didn't trust it. We actually prefer the wait. Weird, because instant gratification, I don't know. We want to feel like the machine is working hard for us. And if a website gives you a tax refund or a medical diagnosis instantly, you don't trust it. You want to see the thinking wheels spin. You want to feel like a team of tiny digital accountants are in there shuffling through your paperwork and sweating over calculators. So the developers built an artificial latency. They literally programmed the computer to wait just so you feel like you got your money's worth. We're so addicted to the illusion of work somehow, for some reason, that we've trained our computers to pretend to be as slow and inefficient as we are. I'd say it's the digital equivalent of a waiter walking slowly from the kitchen so that you think your steak was cooked with care, rather than just being nuked in a microwave. They could bring it out in 30 seconds, but if they did, you'd send it back. You'd say, there's no way this was grilled properly. You just reheated something. And it gets weirder. Some loading bars are intentionally inaccurate. They speed up at the beginning to give you a sense of momentum, and then they slow down at the end to prepare you for completion. It's psychological pacing. The bar isn't telling you what the computer is doing. It's telling you a story. It's like the narrative arc of installing software. Act 1, hope. Act 2, struggle. Act 3, resolution. I don't know. And your phone. Have you ever noticed when you pull down to refresh your email or Instagram, there's a tiny delay? A little spinning wheel. Your phone is capable of refreshing that data in about 0.02 seconds. It's faster than your blink. But developers realized that if the app updated too fast, you wouldn't believe it actually happened. You would think that the app was broken or that it didn't really check for new messages. So they added this artificial friction. They programmed a delay. They added a haptic thud, that little vibration you feel, to mimic the sensation of a physical machine catching a gear. It's a digital placebo. It's the closed door button of the 21st century. We need to feel gears grinding even when the gears are just binary code. moving at the speed of light. And the delete button, on many cloud-based platforms, when you hit delete, the file doesn't actually go anywhere immediately. It stays on a server for 30 days. So you might want to remember that. But in the UI, the user interface, it makes the icon vanish instantly with a satisfying whoosh sound. Why? Because you need the emotional closure of the whoosh. We are crazy people. If the file sat there grayed out while the server processed the request, you would feel anxious, and the whoosh is a lie told to soothe your digital soul, right? So the same thing happens when you send an email. You hit send and it vanishes with a satisfying swoosh sound, but the email isn't sent yet. It's sitting in an outbox for a few seconds, sometimes longer, just in case you want to undo, but the UI doesn't tell you that. It congratulates you. Message sent. No, it isn't. Not yet, but you feel better, so who cares? This isn't just about buttons and apps. It's about how we've been conditioned since childhood to value the procedure over the result, right? I did a recent podcast episode about this, going back to the quicksand. Why were we as children of the 80s and 90s so convinced that quicksand was a top 5 cause of death? Because it gave us something to solve. Don't struggle, lay on your back, move slowly. It's a perfect metaphor for the placebo button. Quicksand is rarely fatal, and you certainly don't encounter it in the suburbs of Ohio. But the instruction gave us a sense of mastery over nature, right? It told us that even in the face of danger, there's a protocol, there's a checklist, and we love a good checklist, don't we? Same with stop, drop, and roll. We spent hours in school gyms practicing this like it was a liturgical dance or something. In reality, the odds of you spontaneously catching fire in a way that requires a tactical log roll are remarkably slim. But stop, drop, and roll is a button we can press in our minds, right? It tells us that even in the face of a chaotic, burning world, there's a 3-step plan. We love the 3-step plan. We love the safety drill. We've all retained it. We all know stop, drop, and roll. I don't know. And think about the pre-flight safety demonstration on an airplane in the unlikely event of a water landing. Sorry, guys, but statistically, if a Boeing 747 hits the ocean at 500 miles an hour, your seat cushion acting as a flotation device is like bringing a toothpick to a knife fight. Okay, so whatever. But the demonstration, the physical act of the flight attendant showing you how to blow into the little plastic tube, it's a placebo for the entire cabin. It lowers the collective heart rate. It's a closed door button for 30,000 feet. It's not there to save your life. It's there to save your nervous system. And honestly, the airlines know this. They've known it for decades. But if they removed the safety demonstration, passengers would riot. We need the ritual. We need the flight attendant to mime putting on an oxygen mask while we're taxiing. Even though statistically, if those masks drop, we're already in a scenario where following instructions is the least of our problems, I'd say. The safety card in the seat pocket, same deal. Have you actually ever read it? Of course not. But you feel better knowing it's there. It's a paper placebo. A talisman, if you will. It says someone thought about your safety. Someone made a plan. Even the brace position, the one where you put your head between your knees. There's a debate about whether it actually helps in a crash or if it just gives passengers something to do in the final seconds so they don't panic and start clawing at the emergency exits. I don't know. I'm not even sure I could bend that way anymore, so it's useless advice for me. We don't want to admit that sometimes the universe is chaotic and uncontrollable. So we invent procedures and we build buttons and we create the illusion that if we just follow the steps, we will be A-okay. So we live in a world that's increasingly automated and algorithmic and honestly out of our hands. We are passengers on a very fast, very confusing bus, and the driver is an algorithm that doesn't speak our language. The placebo buttons are the handles that we hold on to so we don't fall over. We see it everywhere, not just in elevators and crosswalks, but pretty much every corner of modern life. We see it in skincare. The tingle in your face wash isn't the medicine working. It's just menthol added so you think it's working. The scrubbing beads in your exfoliator, they don't actually make your skin smoother, but they feel like they do, so you buy the product again, right? Cars. Have you ever noticed the air recirc button in most modern cars doesn't actually do much? The car's climate control system is already managing airflow automatically, but the button is there so that you feel like you have control over the freshness of your air or something. Close buttons on elevators, refresh animations on apps, the way we obsess over step-by-step solutions to problems that are actually just chaos dressed up in business cash. We see it in restaurants. The waiter who comes by to ask how is everything 30 seconds after you've taken your first bite isn't actually checking on you. They're just performing a ritual that makes you feel attended to. Because if they didn't do it, you'd feel neglected, even if the food is perfect. And can I ask why they are all up in your grill until you order, and then you order, and then they bring you the food, and then they check on you within 30 seconds, and then they never come back again. You're sitting there like 20 minutes after you finished eating. You're waiting for the bill, but they're gone. They're just gone. I don't know why this happens. But anyway, we also see it in customer service. When you call a company and they say, your call is very important to us, and then give us a 45-minute flute solo, that's a placebo. Your call is not the least bit important to them. They could not care less. If it were, you wouldn't be on hold for 45 minutes listening to a jazz rendition of Eye of the Tiger, but the recording makes you feel heard, so you stay on the line. We even see it in democracy. How many, I don't ever want to be political here, but how many times have you voted for a local comptroller or a judge you've never heard of in an election where the outcome was already decided by party lines and gerrymandered districts? But you filled in the bubble and you pressed the button and you felt like you participated, right? But like I said before, the truth is we're all just rats in a Skinner box. Maybe I said pigeons before, I don't remember. But we're in there just pressing levers that may or may not dispense food, and we just keep pressing them because the act of pressing them is the only thing that makes us feel like we're not just floating around through a universe that doesn't care if we live or die. I don't know. Next time you find yourself mashing a button at the crosswalk or waiting for a loading bar or practicing your quicksand escape in the backyard, don't feel foolish. Just embrace the lie. Press the button and twist the dummy thermostat and feel the tingle. Because admitting we have no control over the traffic and the temperature or fire is much, much scarier. The button might be dead, but the feeling it gives you is the only thing that's real. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't need the button to work. We just need to believe that it could. We need the possibility and the potential, and the whole point of this episode, the illusion, right? Because in a world where most things are out of our control, the least we can do is give ourselves the comfort of a plastic circle to press, or a dial to turn, or a lever to pull. It doesn't change anything, but it makes us feel better. And I think sometimes that might be enough, right? Anyway, thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I promise it actually works. Probably.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit authorbethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.